what restrictions are you willing to ease?
So we do want to see businesses reopen, hospitality and sporting venues and so on, and to enable people to enjoy those activities over the summer. And of course, we want to see people going safely back to work. But we think it's important that all the mitigations that help to reduce the spread of the infection are not removed at once at the same time. So we think it's important, for example, that mandatory mask wearing in public spaces should continue. We think that public spaces should be helped to put in place good ventilation systems. And we also, of course, think if people do have to go home to isolate, that they have the financial support they need to enable them to do that. And indeed, if they are having to look after a child who's isolating, that they know that they can use their furlough to provide that childcare.
Now, your point about sick pay aside, the other two restrictions you named are obviously in place at the moment, and that's not stopping the spiralling infections and hospitalisations that we're already seeing. So your plan would really just keep us at the situation we're in, which a lot of NHS figures are saying is already unsustainable.
I think there are other things we need to do too, and you're quite right to highlight the really rapid rise in the spread of infections. So it's also very important, of course, that the vaccination programme reaches out to those who've not yet come forward for vaccines and should do so. And I'd really encourage anybody who has not yet had the vaccination to go and get it, to protect yourself and to protect all of us. I think the other issue is test and trace, Isabel. It needs to work more effectively so that where people are positive, they know very quickly and go home to isolate. I was pinged by the app the other day and told to isolate for 5 days. Now you might say, well, why 5? It's meant to be 10 days. That's because for 5 days, the app didn't catch up with me. And really, when the test and trace system is working as poorly as it seems to be, I think that we need a real effort to make that more effective.
Are you concerned about the potential for tonight's game to be a super spreading event? Not so much perhaps at Wembley, but people celebrating it in the streets and in bars around the country?
I think you're right to say that perhaps the risk at Wembley, where fans will be out of doors, and as we know, the infection spreads much, much less easily in the open air, is perhaps not the biggest concern, that we have to think about people socialising and being in bars and pubs together. And remember, the rules haven't been relaxed yet, so people do need to respect the social distancing, the mask wearing and so on. We have some concerns, I think, from the previous matches that there were rises in infection after those matches took place. That's why I think it's important we have a whole range of mitigations and that we don't remove them, in 8 days' time, that we really do everything we can, consistent with giving people a chance to enjoy this summer, but we do everything that we can to keep everyone as safe as possible.
Now, talking about enjoying the summer, Sadiq Khan has said he plans to go clubbing after the 19th of July. Do you think he's wise to be planning to do that?
I had no idea Sadiq was a closet clubber. There you go. I'm not planning to go clubbing, but I know how much work the entertainment industry has put into making their venues safe and COVID secure, and I think that's really the point. It's about managing the health and safety risk and working very closely with those businesses to make sure that they are doing so. But we do know that that the pressure on people who work in those sectors and the impact that has on their physical and mental health is also very significant. And so I think it is about getting this balance right and keeping people safe, but opening up the economy. The government's very interested in the latter, but we're not seeing enough on the mitigations to achieve the former.
But the argument that ministers would make is that no time is an ideal time, and it is much better to be unlocking in the summer when English school children are on holiday, when we don't have the normal autumn and winter wave of other respiratory infections that the NHS has to deal with. So do you accept that now is the least worst time to be doing this?
Yes, I think that is right. And I heard the chief medical officer suggesting this the other day, that you had to look at not just the volume of infections, but the sort of the timing and the trajectory. And I think it is right to say that the implications in the summer are going to be less grave, although it is very concerning that the NHS is already struggling with an enormous backlog of non-COVID related cases. And so that's why, I stress again, people who've not been vaccinated, please go and get vaccinated. You're helping yourself, you're helping us all, and you're helping the NHS. This addressing the backlog in cancer treatments, in hip surgery, in things that people are really suffering from and in great discomfort and pain has to be a priority. And so I think if we wait until the winter, we will put even more pressure on the NHS. And this gradually coming back into normality now, I think this is the best time of year to do it.
Are you in favour of children getting vaccinations?
Well, I want to see what the JCVI advises. And we've always said it's important to follow expert advice. The evidence so far seems to be that the actual risks to children of being vaccinated are low, very low. But obviously it's a risk-benefit balance, because children don't suffer generally very serious illness from COVID. Thankfully, it's one of the few good things that we've seen in this virus. And so they may not benefit directly themselves from being vaccinated so much as it enables parents, grandparents, and wider members of society to be protected. And of course, there are always the risks of side effects and consequences from vaccines. So I think that is the balance that we need to see the JCVI's advice on. Is the benefit, not so much to children, but to all of us, of having them vaccinated greater than the fact that children will have some potential risk of consequences when they don't mostly benefit directly themselves?
Okay, moving on from COVID to the government's university free speech bill, which starts its journey in the House of Commons tomorrow. You're attacking it, saying it's harmful and divisive. What's the problem with free speech in universities?
No problem at all with free speech in universities. It's absolutely right that we should defend that. And indeed, Labour always has. And, we passed the Human Rights Act to embed the protection of free speech in law. And we've got the 1986 Education Act as well, which provides for free speech on campus. The problem with this legislation, by creating a statutory tort that would enable the disaffected people who've been refused a platform, which could be Holocaust deniers, it could be anti-vaxxers, it could be people who come onto campus to sow division or to send out messages that are hostile to the public interest. They'll be able to go straight to court. This will have a chilling effect in terms of the way universities and student unions behave. And I think this is a real license for hate speech and for people who want to sow that division and their lawyers to come along and put huge pressure on universities and student unions to allow events that really have no place on campus.
Do you accept that there is a problem with free speech in universities? We've had a lot of rows over the past few years over no platforming, particularly of academics who have gender critical views, for instance.
There have been some incidents, Isabel, and you're right, they are of concern. And I don't in any way support intimidation or denying people a platform to express legitimate views in a respectful way. We haven't actually had a discussion in this country ahead of this legislation being introduced about what we collectively think is a respectful and sensible baseline. We've rushed straight in to say anybody who feels aggrieved that they've been denied a platform can go to court and sue the university or the student union. And if it's lawful, and Holocaust denial, for example, is lawful, this legislation enables them to do that. So I think this legislation it's unnecessary. We've got good legal protections already, and it's actually dangerous, and that's why we will vote against it tomorrow.
The Conservatives will say that this puts you on the side of cancel culture, that you're allowing a small, noisy minority of students to stop speakers who are of interest and have perfectly reasonable views, say gender critical views, or even Israeli or Jewish speakers who are coming to universities and being targeted by the BDS movement, for instance, that you're allowing these students to stop them from airing their perfectly legitimate views.
Well, but it's going to allow all sorts of views that I would say, and I hope you and everybody listening would say, are not legitimate. The way this legislation is drafted would allow Holocaust deniers, anti-vaxxers, the same platform as people who've got legitimate views to express. And I think this issue about cancel culture, which, by the way, the majority of students have said they don't see on their campus. There's been research in which students say they're very comfortable that free speech is absolutely at the heart of the way things happen on their campus. But this point about cancel culture cuts both ways, because we're going to see universities and student unions desperately anxious to avoid litigation, perhaps making out-of-court financial settlements to the detriment of funds that ought to be spent on teaching and learning and research, or perhaps actually steering away from having people who want to really campaign on a particular opinion because they'll feel under pressure to have a sort of balance. So I do think there are a lot of difficulties in this legislation, and it's seeking to solve a problem that I'm not saying doesn't exist at all, but which is actually only relates to a very small number of incidents. And I think there are better ways of dealing with them.
Final question before I bring Tom in. You say that Labour has always been committed to free speech, but there have been a lot of accusations in Batley and Spen that you didn't really, as a party, give much support to the teacher who has had to go into hiding following the row about showing the cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. Did the Labour Party really stand behind him?
Let me say absolutely clearly, as I said at the time, Isabel, there is no excuse in any circumstances for the intimidation of teachers. And I think the way that that teacher and his family were forced to go into hiding was absolutely disgraceful. The school quickly took corrective action, and I'm very glad that they did it. And there were undoubtedly people who wanted to just stir up and cause division off the back of that situation. And Labour's and the MP at the time, Tracy Braben's absolute #1 priority, absolutely rightly in my view, was to take down the temperature and enable the school to deal with that matter appropriately, calmly and quietly. And I'm very glad to say that, you know, that's what happened. And that things are now really well settled at that school. And, you know, so I really think anybody who tries to use what's happening around a school is, you know, has to think about what this means for the children. And there were many in the community who did not seem to have those children as their
Great.
priority.